Ja, guten Tag.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Karsten Volkeri from the Handelsblatt, and I'm here on behalf of my colleague, who was actually announced for today. A warm welcome to you in the Hessen representation office, and also to those viewing from at home. We are talking about the industry location Europe, which is a very topical question, how the EU must respond to the geopolitical and geo-economic challenges. I'm discussing today with Mr. Hüther, who is the director of the German Economy Institute. Ever since 2004, he has been holding office there and is famous actually because he has been present in numerous discussions here in Brussels. I'm looking forward to this discussion, which without a doubt will be very interesting. But I would like to tell you also that you may put in questions at the end of the event. You could also opt to send them via email. You should actually have the address now on your screen, or you can use the hotline for your questions. We are going to stop at 2 p.m. sharp. So if towards the end it's really interesting, don't worry. We need to close at 2 p.m. so you will be able to honor all your following meetings or other. I would like to also thank Mr. von Heusinger for his for hosting this event today, and I would like to ask him to take the floor.
Lieber Herr Volkeri, vielen Dank für die.
Dear Mr. Volkeri, thank you very much for the introductory remarks. Dear Mr. Schuster, dear Mr. Hüther, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to warmly welcome you in the name of the Minister for Federal and European Affairs of the State of Hessen, Lucia Puttrich, for this event, together with the Institute of the German Economy here in our representation office in Brussels. I would also like to welcome all those watching from at home. Industry location Europe, how the EU must respond to the geopolitical and geo-economic challenges. This is a very topical question, and it was also one of the priorities at the summit last week and is also contained in its conclusions. Dear Mr. Hüther, I still remember towards the end of last year in November, following the panel discussion, Challenging Times for the United States and the European Union, where our economy and money policy going to. And during this discussion, we talked about a possible driver for the discussion and to find solutions for the geopolitical and geo-economic challenges of the European Union. You are today talking about a new vision for Europe. I would like to thank you and also the entire office in Brussels that is headed by Sandra Parthy. I would like to thank you for this excellent collaboration when preparing the common event. We are looking at challenging times in the European Union. There is the climate change, the transformation in a CO2 neutral economy. We are dealing with the consequences of the pandemics, and there is the EU migration policy, digitization as well, and we want to make Europe fit in competition next to the United States and China. There's the Inflation Reduction Act by US President Biden, which showed that he is looking at America first. The European Commission has reacted to this by publishing the Net Zero Industrial Act. There's also the system competition with China, and we are therefore in need of European responses. During the pandemics, we already saw that the international supply chains are not resilient enough, and the European Commission proposed a Critical Raw Materials Act in this sense. One of the currently greatest challenges is, of course, the Ukrainian war to defend against the Russian invasion. This is an attack by Putin, an attack of the values of the European Union and the liberal system of the West. The EU must, of course, find replies for these challenges, both in the area of foreign security and defense policy, but also on an institutional level in order to be able to respond to future challenges and on an economic level, because we need to be able to stand up in global competition, and in financing, because we need to make sure that we have all the means needed for this. Mr. Hüther will be able to present possible responses and the reforms. And I would like to also thank my own team, Mrs. de Boer, Mr. Hohlefleisch, Mr. Golatzinski, Mr. Fernane, and all the interns that were also helping in preparing this event. Of course, you will be able to enjoy coffee and cake right after the event with us here in the house. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would like to give the floor to Mr. Hüther. Thank you very much, Mr. von Heusinger. Thank you very much for hosting the event, for hosting us in your event with the fact that you replied to the idea born last November. Ladies and gentlemen, just thinking about European Union, about Europe, can sometimes be boring, because very often we're just talking about Europe as a federal state. There's the coalition contract in Germany, where we are indicating that the vision is going towards a federal state. But if you look at the practical terms, we are actually already failing at dealing with each other. European consequences that there are on every level. We want, or how do we want to achieve a European federal state if we're not even able to communicate in a peaceful manner when dealing with difficult topics? There is need of a lot of goodwill, and in the current situation, goodwill should actually be enough, but do we have the best version? Because the idea of such a federal state of Europe is something that we have been dealing with or toying with for a long time, but not really achieved anything. And this means that we should look at other topics and other solutions. Maybe this would be more useful. Europe very often has experienced situations of lack of vision at the end of the 70s, for example, at the beginning of the 80s. And all of a sudden then there were windows opening, especially reports of the European Commission with Jacques Delors that proposed the inner market, which then got a realistic thing in 1993. And now we are talking about the digital inner market. And in 1989, we also had the two topics that were discussed, the political integration and the monetary union. The monetary union, that was something that we managed to do, despite all difficulties. And then in the 90s, of course, we talked especially about enlargement. All the states, all the countries that were able to find their way into a democracy following the fall of the Berlin Wall. But Europe now is ahead of new questions. Some of these were mentioned. What about the next step? What step is possible? There is a pressure for action, which is quite clear, because next to the classical economic topics such as a system competition with the United States, system conflict with China, where we're talking about fundamentally different perspectives for the industries, then we also have the attack of Russia on Ukraine, which means that the geopolitical topics have become priorities, and we cannot just look away. We do need to look at this, and common military action might be more intense than was imagined before. What about the perspective? How can we, in the framework of such a global power competition, stand as Europe? If we look at the proposals that are on the table, for example, the results of the conference on the future of Europe, then you can see that there's a lot of proposal. There are a lot of proposals, 49 of them in different topics, 9 axes that are looking at the position of Europe in the world, but are not directly, not giving any replies, actually. We are talking about direct contribution of citizens, but and another topic is the anti-globalization effects of our supply chain directives. And the margins of action here are not at all what is needed. We need cooperation and not the end of cooperation. Our idea, as such, is to focus on topics, and on a second level also look at the integration logics. We should be courageous enough that we take the term of the federal state, which Walter Hallstein, the first president of the EEG Commission, took to put this away, actually, and to reactivate another concept, the concept of Hans Peter Ibsen, which was the concept of a administration union or special purpose association, which sounds like quite technical, but in actual fact, in topics such as integration, it might be very useful to take this term to the European level. It doesn't have as much charm, it doesn't sound like a really big topic, but it might give us a first step into the areas where it's needed. Instead of talking about a federal European state, we are thus looking at the term of special purpose association for functional integration. Ibsen says we need to make clear, we need to define how functions are associated and where they belong to. As an economist, we have our theoretical constructions. The theory of public goods, for example, says that we need to look at the highest possible level, but there's also the subsidiarity principle, and we need to make sure that there are not competence barriers that we create and that we don't create barriers to legitimacy. So this basic thought of special purpose associations of functional integration looks actually at subsidiarity as a basic principle, and it can also be linked if we have this concrete topic, and there are two topics I would like to. It can be linked to enlargement. Enlargement does not look at everything at once, in one go. It's not always Copenhagen. We can really agree on cooperation in specific topics. Investment union is one keyword. Defense union is another one. We could have a investment union for the big investments and infrastructures in Europe. We can bring European negotiation power on the world market together, and we can create infrastructure with this by creating a strong capital market as a strong backbone for the single economies. The second big topic is defense union. It's a very old topic. In 1954 in Paris, it did not go through because there was fear that the individual powers would not be under individual competences anymore. Macron is talking about the need of a European army for a powerful European military union. We are spending half of what the Americans spend, and we have only 1/4 of its power. We are not in a position to defend our continent alone. After the war started by Russia, the United States once again stood by Europe. We don't think that this will happen anymore. This is why something needs to happen on that level. There's a lot of description also in the White Book of the Economic Service of the European Parliament concerning the costs of non-integration in the classical market, in the energy systems, in digitization and digital transformation, as well as in all the other areas, such as defense. We are proposing two such associations, special purpose associations, in the area of investment and in defense. How should that be financed? I think a defense union cannot be financed by the existing budget. The European Court of Justice, the European courts will not be agreeing with that. But we should have the courage to offer a European service via a specific levy, but in turn there could be countries that would be able to reduce their own taxes so that on a net level the citizens would not be burdened more, but every European citizen would know that he is, in fact, spending money for the European military union, because in this area it seems very important.
Bei der Frage der
As far as the investment is concerned, it's not the best way to look only single things, 6 billion or digital financial parts, whatever we have here. These are only things that are here for a moment. And for me, this is in the next generation EU project. If you want so, this is a second financing part where we give a financing of the structural changes in the digital and the climate approach, and with a clear plan and a clear perspective that we have only important things we want to pay for. This seems to be very clear and strict, but we obviously also have some issues like in a community of purpose, and we could also talk like this for the union with rules here, and we have to develop them further, that we learned, and what we can't reach if we are very specific and if we are considering certain parts, then we can do far more than what we thought beforehand. If we will not manage, then we will obviously see how the competition between the bigger players are important, because we can't think that somebody else will be working for us, like, for example, in defense, like the US are doing right now. And in this case, we should not see a vision of a part of it, and then we could also have cooperation, and we might have an interest in the corridors in the Western Balkan, in Africa, in order to have to save our interests, because we have our partners, and this can be really important and can be also managed. And this is now the start in the things that we want to discuss this afternoon, and the paper is very important, and you can find this on the website. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hüther, for this interesting paper. I obviously read the paper, and once again, go to the website, read it, and have a look at it. You are asking the Delors Plan 2.0 in order to save Europe. Now, the Commission already has made many laws: CHIPS Act, Battery Act, Industry Act, Raw Materials Act. All this can be stated, and there are obviously different approaches for free trade. These are very important elements, but we should also see how we can go ahead with this, because we, the offer of next generation EU, we have people not asking for this money. So are we really efficient with what we are doing? This is a debate that we have here in Europe, especially Inflation Reduction Act. This is a little bit limited in Germany or in France. It is seen like a big investment program that is coming from the Americans, but it's also obviously having or managing more money. for important ideas, and then at the same time we have 15% for taxes in order to get money out of it. And very often you hear only the first part and not the second one. And we have a lot of things in Europe that are not seen. They might be interesting here or there if we would concentrate on the two topics, on the investment or the energy union, for example, because we should integrate everything we have. That should be focused, and we should treat all this means obviously from an important point of view. This would be the fact that the problem is that we get kind of lost. We have obviously nice standards in German, but you also have to deliver. And in the industry, we have some delusion after these laws have been presented. And people said that there are goals, but there is no money for it. Well, it's not that we are not going ahead in Germany. Batteries and the chips that we prepare here in Europe. All these is a very sensible point, and the integration is obviously led and connected to this. And we have really to be careful. Sometimes we should do something generic than talking about subventions. But if you do not do the one, the second one will even be going worse. And we have means that are not useful at the end. And as you said, the EU, you can now match the offers. Is this not automatically something we don't want? Yeah, it becomes this part if you're not taking the second part. Mr. Lindner said that 15%, this is also something we have agreed with the OECD, but I hear this only from one part, and we have to be clear. We have the industry place, which is a middle European part, because we still have a big part in the industry. Italy, for example, 15%. And if we want to stabilize something, then this has to be clear, and we need a scale effect here. We sometimes are blocking ourselves, and the common market is not always like we would like it to be. We would like to make this more attractive, and we have to be able to connect with the big networks. What is helpful if I can't go over a bridge that will be torn down, and we would have more speed. We still have a huge need to have more places also in the renewables, and there we have a high potential, so that at the end of the day we have this high energy costs, and this is something that we can't do only with subventions. So therefore it is very important, and we should really be clear here. Now the railways and the energy, this is a long discussion. Why is nothing going ahead, and where do you see a sign that there might be a change? Well, we have these topics, but in the last commission, we had clear indications what the Digital Markets Act is, and the DSGV, the data standard that is interesting also for other people. Look at the US and California. And we would like to bundle things, but if you ask one thing, one topic after the other, this will not really be helpful. And this is really my biggest concern, that we can use that for whatsoever financing. Everybody knows that the means are not used, and this will not bring Europe ahead. And how real is this danger? Companies are leaving only because well, we have something that is very important. We are not talking about agencies or an institute, and we can have new rooms, for example, in Cologne. But we have the chemical part, and if you want to have batteries, all this is connected, and you can't tell me that. Because there is a short time intervention that we will change something. It might be that we have an investment at another part, but then the other place has to have very many indicators. For example, you have taxes with less taxes, but for the personal, I have to do so many interventions and courses that it would not be feasible. And a subvention, you need really the possibility to bring everything ahead, and therefore you decide. But what is the Inflation Reduction Act? We should see if we are really able to be going ahead with our law here, the due diligence, and then we have the European right or explanation, which and nobody knows exactly what is happening. Now we will have the German law, and this might have the European right at the same level. And what are the companies doing? If they don't want to take the risk, they get out of the market, and therefore the due diligence is an anti-globalization law, there where we should be in the context, in the exchange. We do not do it because we are talking to partners that are not understanding what we want to do, and we should every now and then correct it. Nothing will stay like this, and less red tape is very important. And it's not working one in, one out. This is a rule, but this is not applied. And why is this not working? We see everything is touched down, and we have now the Ministry of Justice. This is important, but the political part for the whole of the government and the laws has changed. In Europe, we do have less sustainability. I also in the refit commission, and we said we can't measure the costs of bureaucracy, but we create a platform where the people can tell us what is not working. Then we have a look at it, and then we give it back to the institution, and this has worked properly. I was there for 2 years, and we have different actors with a sector, and then this should be reshuffled. We lost a lot of energy. Better regulation was not so important anymore, and I guess the people would be agreeing with it.
You already said it's a central idea not to have so many small things, but to look at to focus on the big topics. What would you abolish? Well, that's the main question, actually, because where would you start and where would you end? That's there's so many specific topics, specific for the market, etc. The main question should be, and that's what Ibsen says, is it part of the functional solutions to look at the European level or to look at the regional level or another one? So this is what we are actually doing too little. So it's not about us choosing the topics, but there are rules in Europe where we need to look at their efficiency. Subsidiarity principle is hardly used. Regions could, or countries could make much more, could ask much more that others don't come into their areas of decision, into their competences. So subsidiarity would be a level where we would need a functional separation like the one Ibsen puts the finger on. And then there's a lot that remains for Europe, and it needs a lot of intelligent financing and a lot of work to then deal with this. There are things like defense that for me are not to be separated from the economy, but one thing that is certain is that we need to ask whether reinforcing subsidiarity would not also reinforce the will for Europe rather than the contrary. I think in that case we would actually be in the sense, go into the sense of the citizens. So the things that you mention in your papers, such as, that could be superfluous, like the data protection regulation and the supply chain due diligence regulation, etc. Well, supply chain, of course, it's a question of the export and import and their interaction. So I think I'd say that could be mentioned as a European competency. But in all countries, even in Great Britain, you have anti-slavery laws. I mean, these are not just reinvented, but why are we looking at the European solution now? It's just that it gives us a better position of scale effects. But if this means that scale effects are not improved, but just changed, and it doesn't give us any reward. So it is important that we see, when we do it, that we do it right. Coordination of responsibilities, you can see that there has not been a separation of functions. We could have asked, well, who is going to deal with that? Because if everybody's dealing in parallel, then in the end we don't have transparency and we are losing the scale effects, we're using the networking effects as well. Supply chain due diligence, you mentioned that there's a big gap between what we want, because on the one hand we want a lot of partnerships and trade agreements, and on the other hand we have stepped up the requirements for environmental protection and human rights, which are great, of course, but they counteract, and many partners do protest and not agree to subscribe trade agreements. Would you ask for a lowering of standards? No, well, we need to look at where these gaps come from. On the one hand, of course, you have the economic logic. Of course, we need supply chains that are resilient, that are strong enough, because we do need to be able to develop our economy further. And this is the area where we are acting in a very pragmatic way. The World Trade Organization blocks, so we are going to deal on a bilateral level, and such as also our Chancellor always comes back from any trip with a new with a new trade agreement. And this is something that we need, of course, for our transformation. But on the other hand, there is the moral level. We make an ethical ethical level of politics as well. And this is what we send over or put on the responsibility of the companies. We tell them that they should be ethical. They need to put in a lot of work and a lot of energy and money into topics where actually it's clear for us that standards are normal. We have standards of the International Labour Organization, for example, or others. There's so many different ones. There's consumer policy as well. Consumers as well expect from companies that they are careful with what they do. So all that is logical, but it is different whether we have due diligence in our supply chains and whether this means that I transport my own values into the countries abroad and then expect them to do things in a way that frees us from these moral and ethical decisions. So Inflation Reduction Act as well, and many others, well, politicians in Germany are crying, but they haven't done the same in other areas. Would we have a trade agreement with the United States, then the entire debate on protectionist elements, which is of course legitimately questionable, that would fall away, because then we were on the same level as Canadian partners or others with whom the United States have partners. So all of a sudden, the trade agreement with the United States becomes very important. But look at the quantities with the sum of the many individual bilateral trade agreements with Japan, South Korea, whatever. You can never compensate what you can do between the United States and Europe. So it would be necessary to take it up again, maybe in a different manner. It can only be dealt with on a European level. Of course, trade policy is a European competency, but there needs to be a basic will, and then we need to make sure that we use windows of time in which we have a partner in the United States who is actually prioritizing alliances. Apparently, though, in the United States, you have protectionism. You have had it for years now, which also seems not to be changing in the near future. And then you have protectionism in other areas of the world. Do you think Europe should do the same in order to be competitive, or can we behave differently? Well, behind all of this, you have something that we call autonomous, open strategic autonomy. This is a topic for the European Union as a whole, and all do them. You can also take the economy of China and also see it as an autonomy program. And with their Reduction Act in the United States, they also do the same, because they try to make themselves independent and more resilient. They have shale gas, of course, they have oil, they don't have problems with fracking, they just do it. But Texas is also the greatest energy producer in terms of wind energy of the United States, and with their topography, they make good use of it in order to further develop the energy mix in the United States. They know that fossil energy will not suffice in the future, so everybody's trying to be more resilient for transformation. And I don't know if this means that we need to be protective, but we need to make more intelligent offers in our partnerships. Programs that were published by Joe Biden ever since he took office, macroeconomic programs such as the Rescue Plan with more than $2 trillion US dollar, actually helped the United States and also made sure that we also had a higher BIP, because we had so much more export to the United States. In Germany, 10%, the United States are the first export destination for Germany. China went down 4 percentage points, which means that even we are actually beneficiaries, so to say, of the United States transformation. I'd say that, well, some always look at the negative topics such as subventions and protection, but all that we can see is that it's transformation and restructuring. And Europe should look at the scale effects that are possible on our continent by taking away barriers, by really concretely finishing our common market and looking at investments. It's not just about financing on the state side. Of course, we have this obligation of the state to make it possible that private investments can come in. But what you see in the European Union, there is a tendency to state intervention. Before it was liberalization, now it's more production objectives, and critical voices speak about intervention as such. What do you think about this? Quota of production needing to be in Europe. I mean, all of this is quite funny because I don't know who decided this, but sometimes you have 80% and why not 79 or 83? I mean, you can really go ad absurdum with this. Quota are always very difficult, and it should actually be based on a really intelligent strategy. But if we look at Europe as an industry location and want to create the conditions for the industry, then I'm not worried. But we need to make it in a way that is part of such a policy. And nowadays, industry policy is on all levels. All of a sudden, I mean, before you had vertical and horizontal. You had a horizontal policy for creating good conditions, and then you had sectoral specific, such as the French model, where you looked at investments for specific sectors. In the 60s, it was IT that was publicly subventioned, and in Germany, you had more Germany gave more priority on the horizontal way of creating good conditions. What we do now is that we have decarbonization as one of the priorities, with all that comes with it. And then we have industrial policy for strategic autonomy. And we think that it's too much for the state. We don't think that he will be able, via different quota, make sure that certain things will come to us. I think it's really a question of prioritization. In 2015, there was one big company that was in battery production. And we said, well, batteries are a commodity. They come from the world markets. And all of a sudden, it was founded in Europe, and not only because of subventions by the European Union, but also because it's needed in the closest vicinity. It was clear that globalization was not there anymore in a way that links markets and where we can just move things around. This is the geopolitical impact that we're talking about, and this is why on another side we need to be very strong. And in the end, this is also a decision by the market where companies realize that otherwise they just don't manage to supply themselves, and this was also what came out in the pandemic. And this is what we see now. We don't need to have big investment goals, but we need clear ideas for and clear regulation for infrastructures, and we need to look at the windows of opportunity for transformation. I have so many more questions, but we have to look at the time, and this is why I would like to open the floor for questions. Are there any questions in the public? Second row, a gentleman.
Kurt Reisert, ich gehöre zu dem Team, welches Führung.
Kurt Reisert, and I'm working in the House of the European History. You were talking about defense, and we still not have this defense. We have PESCO, the structured cooperation with the project, also. Would it be a first step to have this enlarged? I only can say yes, 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 because there are many opportunities, and the problem is that we have so many different weapons. In America, they have less. They have 40. We have more than 120. And you should also be courageous and reduce maybe. So in order to have all this context, the Europeans think that we could also reuse things in an efficient way. It's not PESCO, but it's a story when we have the different costs. And this will be very important to talk with the army and those who are working for the army, so that in order to have what the Europeans need. But PESCO is a very important part, no question, but we still have a long way in front of us. And if we talk about a defense union and we will have European structures for the external approach, this should be really enhanced. Other questions? Please. I wanted to say, to come back to the US, delocalization, maybe tax reduction or trainings costs for the people that are working there. But the energy prices we have, I was in Texas last year and they pay a lot less. Wouldn't that be a sign of delocalization? And the Inflation Reduction Act, this subvention approach, is the result of the fact that they will not have a pricing for CO2. If this should be staying like this, how could that go ahead as far as the climate goals or commerce is concerned in the transatlantic exchange? Thank you very much. With the question of energy, we have a very important point, and therefore investment energy union, this is what we are calling it. And if we have a cost effect and we would like to have the renewables quicker. And you see in Germany what the two connections for the big offshore approaches are in the Baltic part, and we have the atomic production nearer to the place. And we have to see how we can tackle with all these, and therefore the energy union is a central part here. The discussion is going ahead how the energy prices can be interesting, and we need some time just to have the renewables, and there we have the contacts and the contracts, and we would like to be reliable without not too much involvement. And we should see where these subventions are in the democratic states of the US, and with another presidency, things might be very different, and Republicans are not very much interested, and now it is like an infinite thing but there are CO2 prices, and we have a CO2 price, 100 euro a ton of CO2, and this seems to be feasible, and this is good and positive for the US, and they don't have a tax in the US, and we had this in the 60s with a clear taxation. on the basis of the country, and in the US it is very inefficient, and with other topics they will not have the possibility or the opportunity to have a taxing in the whole of the US. But these situations have to be also been fed with some money, and we might have a resource approach. And this is for sure a potential. I guess there was another question in the room. Thank you very much for this input and for the discussion. One question as far as the financing of the defense union, because you explained it like a bit next generation EU, but this is financed by debts, and therefore I want to ask, what do you see in the German government? Where can we say something? We can give the European Union the concrete means to have a defense, because we in Germany didn't manage in the last few years. Thank you very much. Yeah, probably I wasn't clear. We will have the investment union. This is next generation EU, the second pillar for this investment for the energy union, and this is something that gives us the reason why the transformation and private implications. Defense is something that is coming from taxes, and on the basis of this, we can't only finance this. We should find a solution here with a European tax, let's say, of the citizens in Europe, lowering the taxes, and the fact that in Germany we have $100 billion approach, and you can't have otherwise a defense. You can't finance it with a credit. Every generation has to finance their part, and this has to be done from the taxes. But if you have so many things lacking, you can't do this in 2-3 parts. And this was a special part in Europe, and we do need another approach. And thank you for asking. I have to ask once again a question. You said we have something for plastic. FDT is not helping. We have to do it with next generation EU, and this 60 billion financing that has to be repaid, and we are not able to tackle with it. We should have a higher budget for financing all this, or otherwise we will need to add something to this. We can't only have debts. This is indeed something we have to tackle within one pillar, because we have the advantage when we are at a European level as far as the rating and the financing costs are concerned. But it's clear that afterwards we have something to repay this, so we will have an interaction between the first and the second pillar. But the question is also, are we able to have a financing pillar? This would be in the sense of Ibsen, with a division at the European level, and why should I use and utilize it in a different way? And the golden rule is a rule about a credit, because the problem that we have now with the European Union, if they have only contributions, they can't have a refinancing effect, and therefore this has to be done thanks to the other states. Thank you very much once again for this question. Thank you very much, Mr. Hüther. And we are at the end of our presentation of our discussion here. We will have still a lot of discussions here, and I would like one final quote. We have 2 events in Hessen on the 3rd of April. Finland has voted, and on the 4th, Bulgaria. You are wholeheartedly invited, and who would like could, with Mr. von Heusinger, have a cup of coffee or maybe some sweet. Thank you very much for being here, and see you next time.